And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 149th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, July 7th, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, we're going to talk about some football and basketball. We're going to get ready for this upcoming 2020, and then for the basketball 2020-2021 season, say that 10 times fast. We're going to talk about the freshman and sophomore classes. So we're going to go in depth. So we're going to start with the IU football freshmen, talk about the guys that might see the field and contribute a little bit this year, then go to the basketball freshmen, then on to sophomore football and freshmen. And this is an annual series of episodes for our podcast we do every summer when things are a little slow and you don't want to be honest, you want to hear every week talking about a COVID-19 podcast. So we're going to give you we're going to look ahead because because the seasons are going to play, right? And we're going to be our positive selves. The seasons are going to happen. So let's look ahead and let's get excited to 2020, 2021, which is going to be a season, at least in the past few years, that it's probably the most excitement around both programs that we've had in of years. But here with me tonight, Matt is he started a new job this past week. He's working up in Yellowstone, so he's kind of out in sort of the middle of nowhere, and he's going to be on here and there where he's just trying to get his feet under him and see when he could actually get on, because it'll be, I think, I didn't ask him, but I think it's 6:30 his time. Here we're holding down the fort. Nithin with me. So Nithin, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Noah. I mean, this is going to be a fun episode as usual. I remember these episodes we did last year, breaking down each class. It's always fun to dive into it. This is going to be the first time a lot of you hear some of these names. A lot of the true freshmen, redshirt freshmen on the football team. You're probably aware of the basketball freshmen and sophomores, but we're going to talk about the guys on the court, the guys on the football field. And remember, we're not going to talk about COVID-19, but this year, COVID-19 does present some unique challenges to new players, incoming freshmen, stuff like that. So I'm really excited to dive into it. And I can't wait to hear the kind of freshmen that you expect to make a big impact for IU this season. And then, after we record our episode, I'm curious to hear what the fans think. Who are the freshmen? Who are the sophomores that they're looking forward to watching this upcoming year, whether it's football or basketball? So it should be really fun.
Exactly. And we were able to have a lot of those spring practices and everyone was able to be on campus and start workouts right now. So really a lot of these announcements right now is going to be talking about just thoughts and feels, at least freshmen, and we're not going to be able to get too in depth since we haven't seen a lot from the specific freshmen, but let's dive into a little bit right now. So starting with the football QB, there actually is a guy that could potentially see the field and could potentially at least, hopefully it doesn't get to it, but you got to know the name Dexter Williams, and I think a lot of you have heard of the name as a recruit coming in. Maybe not necessarily the highest rated QB that Indiana now recently has gotten, but he's a guy that's going to come in. He's going to probably be that third string quarterback right under, of course, Michael Penix and Jack Tuttle. But who knows, man? We hope we don't. Hope we don't see him this year. Hopefully, he is able to redshirt so that he can kind of grow, because especially those, unless you're someone like Charlie Lawrence, even if you're a starter, you're not going to be able to do very much.
And this is the thing with Dexter Williams. He did enroll early. He's a spring enrollee, so he's on campus right now in Bloomington. All indications right now are that this is a guy that the coaching staff loves. He's going to be buried on the depth chart a little bit. There's no question about that. This is somebody who's a 6'1", 190-pound QB, dual threat. One thing we mentioned on a podcast episode a few weeks ago, he had an offer from Navy. And if the coaching staff from Navy, where they run the option offense, if they come after and recruit you, that's usually a good sign. So Dexter Williams, dual threat, certainly an exciting prospect. I don't expect that we'll see him too much on the field, in the coming season, but keep your eye out for him in the future.
Of course, and especially like you said, dual guy that is able to enroll early, but of course, the early enrollment with the spring stuff now sadly didn't mean too much, but kind of get familiar with the team before everything shut down. But the next group of guys, running back, the only name that you might be able to see, especially now, gladly at least, not too many running backs leaving. A guy on the depth chart, and especially it's probably the third string running back, and running back at least isn't like quarterback. Quarter probably never sees the field. At least you hope they never see the field. Otherwise, something totally wrong. Guys get banged up. Maybe a guy has to miss a part of a game. You need it in there. So I would definitely think that we'd see, especially with now that shirt rule, Tim Baldwin, Nathan. I think he's probably going to see the field at least for a few snaps. Probably, hopefully, at least going to be able to redshirt, but at least expect him in there. So for the name Baldwin, when you're looking behind that center.
Yeah, that's the thing. And with Baldwin, you also have to consider some of the changes that happened in the backfield since last season with Ronnie Walker transferring to Virginia. Someone like Baldwin could step into that third string role. And look, guys like Ronnie Walker, Arad Lloyd, they did get some snaps last season, even in meaningful games. So in this upcoming year, especially if they do play a full 12-game regular season schedule, and you can incorporate that 4-game redshirt rule where you can play a guy like Tim Baldwin for 2 or 3 or 4 contests without burning a year of eligibility, he's someone that could definitely take advantage of that. Will that actually be in place for the upcoming season? Who knows? But assuming it is, a guy like Baldwin, who's a pretty highly touted recruit from the state of Virginia, somebody who is a well-built running back, somebody who Mike Hart, the IU running back coach, has taken under his wing, that can definitely be somebody who might score a big touchdown this upcoming season in a non-conference game, or maybe go and crack off a 70, 80-yard run against a team like Rutgers in a game where IU might be up by 3 or 4 touchdowns. If he can get some snaps this season, it's an encouraging sign, especially when you look 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. You remember the name Tim Baldwin. He had a Michigan offer. That's where Mike Hart used to play college football, but he chose to come to IU, so that's exciting.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's I think Mike Hart is starting to like some of those Virginia running back guys, because you got Ronnie Walker that came from Virginia, and now you got Tim Baldwin coming over from Virginia. And at least it's not local to me, so I haven't been able to even hear much about these guys. But the next group of people that I think is probably next, definitely in the offense, and could potentially arguably be the biggest group of freshmen that could have the biggest impact for this football team, is the wide receivers. And there are 2 wide receivers that will most definitely see the field and hopefully have a big impact with this offense and helping Michael Penix and being able to move the ball down the field. And these are guys that definitely don't have to step up and be the main guy on the field. You got obviously someone like Ty Freifogel, and a bunch of other guys that are able to be in the main spotlight for the receivers, so they can kind of just come in and get their catches and grow under this pretty, I guess maybe not young offense, but at least a very young receiving core, because there's a bunch of wide receiver sophomores that we're going to talk about. But those 2 guys, Rashawn Williams, which, of course, if you haven't listened to our interview with him, at the time when he signed, the highest rated IU football recruit that they had gotten. And then the other guy, Jordan Jakes, are definitely going to see the field. These are 2 guys that Rashawn Williams definitely had the name for him. If you follow him on any social media, he's still putting in the work. He wants to get better. He wants to be at IU. And Jordan Jakes maybe didn't have the name recognition coming into the program, but just a lot of back channel chatter. He's a guy that at least, and speaking of, like I said, not as much spring practice and all that stuff to go off of, but a guy that there are a lot of rumors that he's able to probably get on the field. So Rashawn Williams, Jordan Jakes, what else have you been hearing from them?
2 guys that you should definitely, jot down in your IU football notebook, if that's if such a thing exists, because Williams is somebody who's coming in with a lot of recognition. especially among the coaching staff. They went after the 6'1", 185 blue chip prospect. I think officially, according to 24/7 Sports, he's a 4-star recruit. He could have gone to any one of the premier Big Ten schools. He chose to come to Indiana, and we talked to him a few months ago, and he said, look, I want to make my impact on a school, and I get it. If you go to a school like Ohio State or Michigan State, even put up big numbers, who knows exactly how much you're going to be remembered, especially if your team in those schools only wins 7 or 8 or 9 games. If you come here and put up those type of numbers and win that many games, you're going to be remembered for a long time. Just ask some of the players on the IU football team last year. So Rashawn Williams is someone that's going to get reps. And look, we don't have an official depth chart in front of us, but make it known that he's going to play for IU this coming season. Jordan Jakes is a very interesting prospect as far as IU football is concerned, especially in the receiver room. I've mentioned the story before on this podcast, but IU wide receivers coach Grant Hurd during fall training camp last year, even during bowl practices leading up to that game against Tennessee, it's like Hurd feels that Jakes is the number one receiver on the team. I mean, he is coaching Jordan Jakes more than he coaches a guy like Nick Westbrook or Whop Fillier. And those guys have so many more receptions and yards and experience. And potentially it's because Hurd sees a lot of potential in Jakes. And remember, Hurd is somebody who used to be a wide receivers coach at Ole Miss and developed guys like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown over there. So Grant Hurd knows what he's talking about. Jordan Jakes is a redshirt freshman, still very green. He's a really tall guy, okay? If you think of somebody like Donovan Hale from last year who had to move on after his time at IU, Jakes eventually could project to be a Donovan Hale type receiver. So 2 very interesting prospects. Williams will definitely see the field. I'm not sure about Jakes. I wouldn't be surprised if Jakes caught a touchdown pass this coming season, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. And with wide receivers, since you could have so many of them on the field, that's why I think you'll see them at least at some points, at least Jordan Jakes for a couple snaps, especially we're going to keep going back to it with the underclassmen, that 4-game redshirt rule for everyone. So definitely for the wide receivers. This next the tight ends, we probably wouldn't have mentioned him if there weren't the other off the field issues that are potentially going around the tight end room. So you've got obviously Peyton Hendershot, and I think he's the key here to see if Gary Cooper, a redshirt freshman, is able to play, just because the depth chart more or less, and again, there's no, like you said, there's no official depth chart. It's kind of just what you see on the field. Zach Osterman likes to put one out, but again, he did this back in like April if you go look at his most recent one. So like you've got Peyton Hendershot, then you've got Matt Bjorson, and you've got that grad transfer Cameron Taylor that came in, and then you even got Teron Ivey Jr. as a redshirt sophomore, which we'll talk about in a second. So I think the only way we would see Gary Cooper potentially have a couple snaps is if Hendershot is not able to play for probably the most of the season, and because sometimes I think IU is going to try and use tight ends a little more than other schools coming up here. So if Hendershot doesn't play, I think you could see Cooper coming in, but he's a guy that's probably going to grow a little more, see a little more practice time, and then start to come in, especially as someone like Hendershot and Bjorson start to graduate in a couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of the great college football programs, and I'm not putting IU in the same bucket as Alabama or Clemson, but a lot of what they do is build up that depth where if something happens to a guy like Peyton Hendershot, in his off the field situation, or if someone does get injured in the tight end spot or the wide receiver spot or whatever, that next man up transition is really easy. And with Gary Cooper, with TJ Ivey, you've got a couple of young tight ends who can step in after getting a little bit of playing time last year. They can step in. They know the jargon of the offense, even though there is a new coordinator, although Nick Sheridan's an in-house guy. It's not going to be that stark of a change. As far as Gary Cooper, though, goes, in those 2-3 tight end sets, Cooper is going to stand out. This is a guy who had offers from Florida and Michigan. If Jim Harbaugh likes you, and he's a guy who spent time in the NFL coaching there, that's usually a good sign. So Gary Cooper, somebody from the state of Florida, and it's again the state that Tom Allen loves recruiting. Gary Cooper, somebody who definitely should be on your watch list as far as tight ends are concerned, or even really the freshman, sophomore, underclassmen are concerned. He could be a really special player.
All right, our next group, the offensive linemen, is not a very, at least, and for offensive linemen, even when IU was, let's say, not making a bowl game, to say the least, even some of those offensive linemen, IU was not churning out and having, and this is just pretty standard in all of football. Even in the NFL, you don't see a lot of rookies starting, at least on the offensive line. But the one guy you could potentially see in a rotation, especially with 5 guys on the offensive line, someone's usually bound to get injured, especially this year when they're not able to condition as much. So you could probably see Michael Caddick, a redshirt freshman, come in there as a backup, because I saw him in a couple spots that he could play a couple different roles, whether it's guard or tackle. So other than that, I think he's the only freshman that you could potentially see in a backup role if someone else get hurt. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's just there are a lot of more established players up front, and we're going to get into them in a moment here. So I'm not going to spoil it for those of you listening. I don't expect any true freshmen really to make a big impact up front.
Nope, not like Matthew Bedford did last year. Let's move over to the other side of the ball, the defensive linemen, and this is probably the biggest group of guys that you could potentially see a rotation for, and defensive linemen anyway. This is a position where you see a lot of guys running off and running on and off the field, because they're obviously the ones trying to rush the quarterback as best as they can, or plug those running gaps, and it just happens to be that this is a year where there are literally 5 guys that could potentially see the field, and I think it's going to be just whoever is able to do the best is going to get the most playing time. But the biggest one that we've talked about the most, and you've heard this name already, is Bo Robbins, the redshirt freshman, now that he's going to be able to come in his first full year, and I expect him to play a lot. I think they wanted to try and grow him last year and redshirt him so they could keep that extra year, but he's going to be a guy that is hopefully going to be really huge for this defensive lineman. The other guys that you might see here and there, so if you're looking, and now that the names are back on the jerseys, you could probably see I think that's how you say it, Lewis, CJ Person, and then a redshirt freshman, Antoine Whitner, and redshirt freshman, Jeremy Passamore.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting names in that list. Let's start with Bo Robbins. I mean, this is a guy, we talk about Rashawn Williams glowingly, as we should, on the offensive side. Bo Robbins, a guy from Carmel, 6'5", 250, 4-star recruit. Again, another example of somebody who could have gone to any high-profile school in the Midwest if he wanted. He got SEC offers. He got ACC offers. Chose to come to Indiana. Robbins is somebody who we said last week or a couple of weeks ago on our podcast could be somebody that not only gets on the field, he might be a dark horse candidate to lead IU in sacks next year. That's how much talent he's got. You saw somebody like George Karlaftis make an immediate impact for Purdue last season. Bo Robbins has that type of upside, especially on a defense that important, valuable snaps are available if you really bring it. As far as the other players you mentioned, I like CJ Person. Tom Allen has talked about DeMarge Lewis to the media before, explicitly calling Lewis out by name. The other player you mentioned there that I've seen mentioned on Twitter by people like our old friend Blake Betzner, who's been in our podcast before, is Jeremy Passmore, defensive lineman, highly regarded. He's somebody who's had a year now to improve, to learn the defense under Tom Allen. He could have played at Iowa. He could have played at Georgia Tech. He chose to come to Indiana. But all in all, I think the story on the defensive line for IU is that young or old, there are bodies there. And when you go up against Michigan or Ohio State or even a team like Penn State or Purdue next year, which is going to have a dangerous offense, you need those bodies up front. That's what you're going to see with the group of guys that we just mentioned.
Before I go on to the secondary, Nathan, I don't see any linebackers or special teams seeing the field at all. Do you? Is there anyone that you saw?
The one guy, and I'm from Northwest Indiana, the region. Cam Williams, linebacker, is somebody who I would keep an eye out for. I would look out for. Highly touted freshman. He redshirted last year. With somebody like Raekwon Jones moving on after his time at IU, Cam Williams might be someone who steps in. But there it's just who's going to step up. That's what we're going to find out in the fall. Keep an eye out for Cam Williams.
Yeah, it's just a hard.
Yeah.
Linebackers is so deep right now because you've got Micah McFadden Jr., Cam Jones is Cam Jones, not Cam Williams, the junior that'll probably be the star of the linebackers. You've got Thomas Allen still in there, and then you've got some sophomores that we're going to talk about down below. That's at least 6 people that you could potentially have before him. So, yeah, I agree. And then the one secondary guy that you could potentially see. He's still pretty far down because the secondary is pretty loaded. But again, that's another position that you could potentially be using 4 or 5 of them on the field at a time. That you might need, and they're obviously running up and down the field a lot. That you could see a lot of movement there, especially if someone gets injured, or like we saw last year. A lot of younger classmen, when the upperclassmen weren't performing, come and take those roles. The one guy, and I always want to say when I look at it, Josh, it looks like spaghetti at the end. But so if you look at the back and it says, it looks like it's spaghetti, a redshirt freshman. Josh Sanguinetti is the guy that you could see as a redshirt freshman coming in to make some sort of difference on this defense.
Yeah, absolutely right. Larry Tracy, Noah Pierre, a couple of other possibilities, but Sanguinetti is someone who I remember watching in fall practice last year during a 2-minute drill. I can't remember if it was Peyton Ramsey or Michael Penix, but it was one of those two. He took one of those guys and pick six them into the end zone during a 2-minute drill during fall practice, and that's when I said, okay, all right, I see why they recruited this guy. He may not have been ready to play last year, but the secondary depth is always required, always necessary. Josh Sanguinetti sounds like spaghetti, could absolutely be an option next season.
Josh Spaghetti will round up our football freshmen. All right, on to our IU basketball freshmen, and we've talked a lot about just basketball in general, these freshmen and sophomores. So basketball, we're not going to dive too much in depth with it because we already have and we already will. But especially also, like we've said, with not a lot of summer workouts, to see where kind of people are going with everything, to see if someone like Anthony Leal or Trey Galloway are kind of battling out, if someone's kind of coming above one or the other. But the 4 freshmen that are really going, we're not going to talk too much about the walk-ons, but the 4 freshmen, of course, Anthony Leal, Trey Galloway, Jordan Geronimo, Christian Lander. I'm not going to say who, Nathan, which one you think is going to make the biggest impact, because I think that'd be an easy answer. But after Christian Lander, out of those 3, Leal, Galloway, and Geronimo, which one do you think is going to have the biggest impact? I think that's a more tough question when you're talking about the freshmen. We have our first mess up where Nathan does not unmute himself.
There we go. All right. No, that's
Turn
good.
Turn your
that's
mic
good.
on. You're a professional.
Yeah. No, we're good. I know. Seriously. Anthony Leal. Anthony Leal is going to be my answer. Until Justin Smith transferred, I would have said Anthony Leal, no doubt. But with Smith's transfer, I'm starting to think, okay, maybe Jordan Geronimo with his athleticism could be a dark horse candidate to win, to be the correct answer to that question. But more I think about it, it's Anthony Leal. I mean, the 3-point shooting. I can't talk about 3-point shooting every week during the season and then not pick a 3-point shooter here. So give me the Bloomington South kid, who apparently takes like 500 threes a day, every day as he gets ready for the season. Look, there's no debate here, if you ask me. I mean, I'll turn the question back to you, Noah. Is it Leal for you, or do you think it's Trey Galloway or Jordan Geronimo?
And for those that, if you might have been talking to someone else when you missed that, I prefaced this by saying this was, of course, after Christian Landers. So the
Hmm.
three of those, and I'm going to have to agree. I think Jordan Geronimo is a guy that when we're going to have an in-depth uh, roster and lineups podcast, we always do right before the basketball season starts. So we'll literally go an entire episode talking about who's going to play where, what kind of lineups you might see. I think Jordan Geronimo, when it's all said and done, again, Archie Miller tries, and he's really been trying at Dayton. He only likes 7, maybe 8 men lineup rotations, and he's tried really the past 2 years. He's really got his feet wet with 9, 10, even 11 guys rotating in one game. Even then, where you got 12 scholarship guys, I still think Jordan Geronimo is going to be a guy that's farther down the list when it's all said and done. So then it's just Leal and Trey Galloway, where a lot of
Yeah.
people just the easy answer saying they're basically kind of doing the same thing. They're going to be battling for one position. Again, that's just way oversimplified, but I agree. I think Leal, at least at
Yeah.
the very beginning, is going to come in and do just a little more than Trey.
Yep.
But hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully they're both um, doing a lot of stuff to help this team.
Yeah.
But before we get into our sophomore class, Nathan, take it over on who won the week this past week for IU sports.
Yeah, really interesting news coming down a few days ago from the NBA, where they're trying to restart the season. It's coming up at the end of the month in Orlando, and teams and players are starting to travel there. Except the other day, we heard that Victor Oladipo decided that because of the health concerns, playing in the NBA restart coming up is not in his best interest, and he opted out. And I'm saying that Victor Oladipo won the week, because here's the deal: when you talk amongst your friends and family, and when you talk among your classmates or whatever, your coworkers, and you say, this is a really serious health crisis, and you know what, everyone's got to do what they feel like doing. Everyone's got to take it safely. Everyone's got to be real about it. And then all of a sudden, I see a lot of keyboard warriors complaining that Victor Oladipo is not playing in a basketball tournament in July and August. To me, there's a disconnect there. Props to Victor Oladipo. I can't imagine how tough of a decision it must have been for him. Good for him for taking a stand, doing what he feels is right for himself and those around him. I know he's traveling with the team, and I know a lot of people are looking at that and saying, oh, how come he's traveling if he's not playing? Well, it's a very delicate situation. So unless you know what he's going through behind the scenes and what he's talking about with his teammates and his coaches and his family, you don't know the full answer. Props to Victor Oladipo. I tip my cap to him taking a stand, making a tough decision, and doing what's right for himself.
On a normal year, I
Mm-hmm.
would disagree with you because I really
Yeah.
think you should, especially like all those football guys. I get the point of why they do it, but skipping out on the bowl games, I get it. I don't agree with it on a normal year, but with everything going on, I totally agree with you,
Yeah.
Nathan. You just don't know everyone's situation, and you don't need to know everyone's situation. You don't need to know their personal life. You don't need to know if Victor is looking after his grandma that's really old and has an autoimmune disorder or something like that.
Yep.
You just don't know. So just hold off on the judgment. And because news came down today that my poor local team, the Wizards, Bradley Beal is sitting out, and they played it off by saying he has like an injured rotator cuff or something. Just I was like, okay, just say he's gonna sit out, but and get ready for when John Wall comes back
Mm-hmm.
next year. But I totally agree, and I'm gonna take Matt's social media shout out of the week. And of course, you're all already following the IU men's basketball Twitter page, but they at least posted the link of the IU Hoosiers website that kind of give a lot of updates and a lot of articles on all the sports when something happens. They posted about the 6 former Hoosiers that will resume play as the NBA season starts in Orlando, and even talks about some of those guys that their season is quote unquote over for some of those bottom 8 teams if they end up having a second tournament up in your neck of the woods ish in Chicago. But let's move on to our sophomores and the sophomore. And thankfully, Nathan and I were talking about this before. Thankfully, we're not talking about a whole lot of guys that are going to have to be impactful for this football team, because typically for Indiana, usually you see a lot of these guys as freshmen and sophomores getting thrown into starting roles and having to contribute, and that's where the lack of obviously Indiana performing and making bowl games is it's kind of at a disconnect. And thankfully, we're not talking about a lot because the overall team is better on both sides of the ball. But definitely, the QB spot is one of those sides, though, that is really, really, really important to this entire team's season for literally two reasons. And we honestly don't even have to talk about Michael Penix, a redshirt sophomore, anyway. He's kind of one of those guys that we talk a lot about, the people that won't be playing a lot. He's the one guy that we really don't have to talk about at all on the side of playing because of just the impact that we all know he has. So there's no reason to dive into that. But in case he does get injured, we don't have we don't have a guy like Peyton Ramsey coming back to back him up in case he does get injured. And again, we've said good for him. We're really glad, and we truly mean that he's able to go to Nathan's neck of the woods again in Northwestern. So the backup is another sophomore, redshirt Jack Tuttle. And last year, his transition as a transfer, and he kind of had a rough transition and everything. But from what he started out, and it was a huge drop from Peyton Ramsey to Jack Tuttle from what we heard last year, from second to third string quarterback. But again, from things that we hear from practice, he is really, really improving. He's probably not going to be Peyton Ramsey-esque, at least as a backup, but hopefully he's able to keep improving. And we don't have to see him a lot on the field, but if he does, at least hopefully it's like a couple spots to where maybe he can win Indiana a game or two, or just finish it as Michael Penix just bruises, gets a bruise on his arm or something and is back the next day.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. And with Tuttle, I can't imagine how much he would have absorbed and learned last year to be in the QB room with Penix and Ramsey, two guys that, Penix has been around the program now. This is his third year. And Ramsey, we know how long he was in Bloomington. I can't imagine how much Tuttle would have learned. Remember, he's also bringing over some experience from Utah as well in his 1 year there. So this has to be a situation where this has to be an off season. I've got to think he's put in a ton of work, and there's no way we're going to know this until fall practice or until the games start. But, as somebody who's basically sit out the last 2 years, Jack Tuttle is next man up. And if Indiana, ideally, even goes up big in some of these non-conference games or even some of the conference games, well, it's Jack Tuttle who's going to step in, and he's got to be ready to seize that opportunity. And look, he and Peyton Ramsey are two completely different types of quarterbacks. Ramsey, the mobile guy, is rolling out, doing all sorts of Houdini stuff in the pocket, whereas Tuttle stands tall, delivers the football, pro style QB. But of course, in Indiana's offense, what is pro style anymore nowadays anyway? Look, Tuttle's a guy who's somebody IU fans should get behind. He's somebody who I'm expecting is going to step up, and when he does get called on, makes some nice throws down the field and really takes over the offense when he's on the field. If he doesn't play, that means Michael Penix was healthy for 12 or 13 games or 14 games if IU wins a national championship. And when Penix goes off to the NFL, then Jack Tuttle can step in. But, as far as Tuttle goes, pro-style QB, capable of making all the throws. What was his development? We're going to find out sooner rather than later.
And we'll also have to, again, this is all just stuff that we've heard on the practice field, but maybe not temper expectations, but maybe at least give him a chance to get his feet wet in case he does go into a game, because he hasn't seen any real football. And like Nathan said, over a couple years, and even then, he's still a redshirt sophomore, which means usually they haven't played very much in college football anyway, so they have to kind of get acclimated to actual game time speed. The next position, another pretty important position. There are a few important positions for the sophomores. Only one, though, that's probably going to see the field. Now, at least, there's only one. Running back Samson James. I think he's going to have a bigger role this year. You saw him and you could see the reasons why he got a little frustrated and why he wanted to transfer right away, just because obviously he's going to be behind Stevie Scott. But I think he's going to have a more prominent role because, like we talked about with Tim Baldwin, I think there's still a pretty big drop-off between Samson James and Tim Baldwin. So when Stevie Scott's not in there, I think Samson James is going to have a more defined role. He's going to have a more a set amount of minutes, or at least a bigger set amount of minutes, because some games you seed him for a lot, and some games you seed him like one snap at all. So Yeah, I think Samson James will be pretty important to this offense, especially since it's a running back position that Stevie Scott's going to need a breather.
Yeah, and I mean, look, this is a guy. He's 6'1", 220. Could have played at Ohio State. He's got all the tangibles, and we saw him. In that Purdue game last year, he stepped up when his number was called on. He had a good performance, over 100 yards and a touchdown. He's he's going to be a really really good running back at Indiana. It's just a matter of when. And if Stevie Scott, God forbid, gets injured, Mike Hart and Tom Allen and the rest of the IU coaching staff can feel confident knowing that Samson James can step in and be the bell cow running back if necessary. I'm curious to see if he can develop some type of receiving ability out of the backfield. That's something where there's a lot of unknown. He had 3 catches last year, but that's not something that really stands. I'm sorry, 2 catches last year, and that's not something that really stands out in his game. But if he can develop a pass catching portion to his game, now all of a sudden maybe you can see IU put him on the field a little bit more. You see it with a lot of teams in the NFL. They kind of have a between the tackles running back, and they have a third down pass catching running back. Maybe Samson James picks that up in the offseason, and in a couple months we see him put that on the field. I don't know.
That's a great point. And I think he has aspirations, and I hope he does. And that's really something that you're going to need as a running back nowadays going into the NFL. And I think you also said it pretty well too, when you're like, if Stevie Scott does go down, which there's no reason that he hasn't shown any reason that he would, but if he did, I think that we'd be actually pretty comfortable with Samson James being that bell cow running back, which says a lot about him. Next group of guys, and there are a few of them that are going to have pretty key contributions, because you've got obviously Wap and Freifogel with the receivers. The guys right after that are sophomores. There's really not too much between those two guys and the juniors and seniors, and all the way down to this group of all redshirt sophomores with Miles Marshalls, Jacoby Hewitt, David Ellis. All guys that kind of see, at least last year, saw the field relatively the same amount. You've got a guy with David Ellis that could start to really grow into a really a huge deep threat, a guy that could just be a huge game turner. He's probably at least a possible kick returner as well. Miles Marshall saw the field, I think, a fair amount, especially as a freshman last year. You got Jacoby Hewitt you saw come in for a few snaps here and there as well. So this is a wide receiver core that we saw with like the running backs. There's only one guy. The quarterbacks basically one guy if you don't count the backup. This is a really key group of guys in the sophomore class that have a really big potential of keeping this offense going for what they were able to do last year.
Yeah, I love David Ellis. I'm going to start with him. This is somebody who's kind of a jack of all trades in this offense. You saw him line up in the backfield. You saw him throw a 2-point conversion against Ball State. He had a number of receptions as well. Ellis is somebody who's going to carve out a bigger role for himself in this offense, especially with Nick Westbrook and Donovan Hale and Ronnie Walker all moving on. Ellis had a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, or he had a rushing touchdown. He didn't have a receiving touchdown last year, which sounds kind of funny when you think of him that way. But as a kick returner, also Indiana for the first time in a long time, if you ask me, had a stable presence as kick returner last year, but also at the same time a guy who could break off a big one. If the holes opened up for him. So I love David Ellis. And last year at this time, we weren't really talking about him as a major impact player coming out of high school.
It was a surprise.
Now, all of a sudden, you can expect to see number 10 in your program, get the football and try to stretch the defense side to side. Miles Marshall's a really interesting receiver option. He's more of your traditional wide receiver. By the way, I saw Miles Marshall sent out a tweet earlier this week to try to get people to go out and vote, which always great to see student athletes who possibly even for the first time are able to vote and spreading that message out to their classmates and teammates. But Marshall last year was somebody who had close to 20 receptions. He had a receiving touchdown, and he and Michael Penix seemed to have a connection, a chemistry, and perhaps that's something they developed during different practices before the season. I didn't think Marshall and Ramsey, I don't know what the stats are off the top of my head. It didn't seem like Marshall and Ramsey were on the same page a lot of times. It felt like Penix and Marshall were in sync a lot. So ideally, with Penix starting every game this coming season, Marshall's somebody who, although he had 16 catches last year, maybe he doubles or triples that number in the upcoming season.
Yep. And the next sort of kind of like a receiver, the tight end, we mentioned Teron Ivey Jr. in the freshman when we were talking about Gary Cooper. I don't think we even need to talk about him just because he's kind of in the same situation as Gary Cooper. Especially if Petershot doesn't play, I would expect to see his name called a couple times, depending on how he's able to develop. But the offensive linemen as a group really, again, we could talk about Matthew Bedford, but he's kind of like Michael Penix. He's a guy that's going to start to be like we thought last year. And I was even on Matthew Bedford's, I think, before even you or Matt were, where you were guys like, I don't think he's really going to play. And I was all for him starting and making a huge difference as a freshman. And he was able to be a difference maker, minus a couple pretty bad games, but minus those couple games which I mean, he's a freshman. Yeah. He was a really big difference maker in a lot of games. So he's a guy that we're going to expect a lot just as a freshman, and then a guy that you could see as a backup. Aiden Rafferty, you might see his name called if some people end up getting injured.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew Bedford, I don't want to gloss over him for now. I know everyone knows who Michael Penix is. He's the quarterback. But, I've heard people say, the NFL, at least, if the most important player on your team is the quarterback, the second most important player is the guy that protects the quarterback. And Matthew Bedford's going to be doing that along with Caleb Jones this upcoming season. Bedford went from true freshman at the start of last year to, at this point, as we're talking in early July, NFL scouts are noticing who he is. And he's barely scratched the surface. And at the end of last season,
a sophomore, that was one season as a true freshman too.
That's
not even a red shirt.
And at the end of the year, when he was thrust into the fire and going up against guys like Yetur Gross-Matos from Penn State or Darrell Taylor on Tennessee,
bless you,
or George Karlaftis from Purdue, Bedford mostly held his own when he had to go up one-on-one against those guys. So it's really interesting and exciting to see a guy like Bedford on the line. Other than him, though, I don't expect to see any other guys making an impact. I do want to mention the name Charlie O'Connor. He might get some snaps this upcoming season, depending on how practice goes. But, Matthew Bedford, if he's not the most important freshman on IU, the most important sophomore in IU after Michael Penix, or the third most important, I don't know how I'd rank. I don't know how I'd rank Penix, Mullen, and Bedford. Penix would be one. Whoever's number two, that's a really interesting conversation. If you put Matthew Bedford as the second most important person there, I wouldn't argue with you too much.
Same thing with Mullen. Yeah, I totally agree. That's a great discussion, actually. That's a good Twitter poll. We should put that out at some point. Going over the other side of the line, and Nathan says this name very well, but Sio Nofuagatotoa. Was it close?
Yeah, it was good. Yes. Yeah, he's important though. I'm glad you mentioned him. He's number 50 in your football roster. I mean, he's somebody he's going to make an impact for IU. He plants himself right there as the nose tackle in IU's 3-4 scheme. And he's not going to put up a ton of stats. The nose tackle in a 3-4 scheme rarely does. But as somebody who plays almost every snap, or he's going to absorb that role here in the upcoming season, he's putting in the work. If you go follow him on Twitter, if you go see what he's doing, he is, lifting all sorts of stuff and jumping and doing all sorts of workouts. He's a really good player. Keep an eye out for him. I don't know about NFL draft prospects or anything like that, but as a stable presence on the defensive line, he's definitely one to watch.
And again, he's a true sophomore, so there's still time for him to grow. And if he's already getting a prominent, maybe not prominent, but like you said, a stable, that's a good word, a stable role.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good for him. And especially with D line, I'm not even saying that he's going to be a backup, but you can never have much depth with the D line just because of the amount of people that you run on and off the field all the time, because it's a position that uses so much energy all the time. He's a key guy that you're going to see in the backfield. Just call him CO. Going right behind them, a bunch of guys, and maybe not as much as the defensive line, where they're kind of coming in and out. The starters really have a little more of a stable role as to where they don't come on and off the field as much because of getting gassed. But this group of redshirt, almost all redshirt sophomore linebackers, James Miller, Aaron Casey, and then true sophomore DK Bonhomme. Those are guys that are gonna see the field. I think all three of them, more James Miller, probably DK, and then probably Aaron Casey as well. They're gonna see the field. It's just depending on how much they're able to produce, how much they're able to take opportunities when they actually see the field. And again, it's not necessarily three dogs, even two bones or one bone, but it's just kind of because they play different positions. We kind of lumped all the linebackers in one because you've got, especially with defense getting crazy, even with like Huskies and the outside and the inside linebackers and stuff. So they all have different things, but you could probably see all three of them on the field at some point, some more than others.
Yeah, and I love James Miller, and I would agree with that ranking that you put out there of those three guys with Miller and then Bonhomme and then Casey. Miller's he's somebody who who appeared in almost every game, if not every game, for IU last season. Putting up over 30 tackles. He led the team with 2 forced fumbles, and that's always a stat I like to see because the fumble recovery, I think, sometimes gets a little bit too much attention. Who's actually popping the ball out? Who's actually ripping the ball out or punching it out? That's what James Miller's doing, and he's a 6'2", 220 linebacker. I love what he's capable of doing. We talked about Raekwon Jones' departure earlier. He's going to step in and make an impact. DK Bonhomme, he's a really interesting player. Another one of those guys who hasn't played much, if at all. He's going to be a very interesting prospect in that linebacking core. Is he going to play inside or outside? Is he somebody who, he was a highly touted recruit. And Tom Allen has routinely mentioned him in press conferences, after practices, during game weeks, as somebody who's popping to the coaching staff, who's standing out. This might be one of those surprise defensive players that when bowl season comes around, we're saying, wow, like, look at this guy starting for IU, or look at this guy making big plays for IU every week. DK Bonhomme could be that player.
The next group of people, and there's really only one of them, because when you get to the secondary, there are a lot of junior and seniors for the secondary group. We really aren't even shorting anyone when you only talk about Josh Sanguinetti at the freshman, and then, of course, Taiwan Mullen for the sophomores. And he's a big guy, but he is the only guy that we're really going to talk about. And again, kind of like Michael Penix, we don't need to talk about him too much because, like Nathan said with Matthew Bedford, if you wanted to put for those sophomores even all offense and defense, who would rank the second most important after Michael Penix, you could really have a huge argument with Bedford or Mullen for multiple different reasons, because he's a guy that just had a humongous freshman year, and he's a guy that he himself is like, all right, I had a freshman year, that's the worst year I've had, and he's just going to keep improving, keep getting better, and he really wants to, like his brother, start to get on NFL. He wants to get to the NFL. He wants to do even better and get. I don't think he's a guy that even wants to be like, I'd be okay with like a lot of IU players getting drafted 5th, 6th, 7th, even 4th round. No, he wants to be a guy that's going to be at least on NFL scouts' radar when he's getting at least to a junior and or a senior, at least in the 1st or 2nd round, depending on what kind of class those secondary cornerbacks come out when he ends up going pro.
Yeah, Taiwan Mullen's an absolute beast in the secondary. I know Pro Football Focus loves him. If you don't love him, you need to reevaluate your football watching skills because Taiwan Mullen, he does everything you ask him to. And he's like, let's face it, the reason he was under-recruited is because he's undersized. Well, he clearly has proven that that doesn't matter. When you have the ball skills that he does, when you have the footwork that he does to stick with all the best wide receivers in the Big Ten. I remember there was a sequence against Michigan State last year where he batted away 3 consecutive passes that they were trying to throw to Darrell Stewart, one of the best receivers in the Big Ten, in the end zone. And Mullen just went step for step with Stewart, who had a really good season last year for MSU. That stood out to me as far as Mullen goes. There's no more we need to talk about Tywone Mullen here. He's great. He's going to be even greater. He's an awesome player for sure.
All right, and that just wraps it up with our special teams. And this is a pretty easy discussion. And again, we're only talking about the sophomores here, but I think Charles Campbell is definitely going to, if anything, get the benefit of the doubt to be that starting kicker. So he redshirt sophomore Charles Campbell. If you think about it, last year too, as a redshirt freshman coming in that Purdue game, being able to hit a lot of those field goals. It's a guy that we could see a lot of promise with, and hopefully we won't be crossing our fingers too much when he goes up to try and make a bunch of field goals. And then another guy that everyone always forgets about, but is a very important position, because a guy throwing the ball to the placeholder for Charles Campbell to kick that ball is the long snapper, and also the long snapper getting it to the punt returner, because you've seen on way too many like ESPN not top 10 plays where that long snapper misses and it goes over the head, or it's just a bad placement. Sean Ratcher, a guy that, again, long snappers are people too. He's a guy that's actually a very good long snapper as well. We talked about him last year in our freshman group. He's a guy that could potentially get onto some NFL radar and be able to play in the NFL, because he was. We talked about him last year. I'm pretty sure he was the guy we talked about as arguably the top long snapper coming into college that year, and has done a lot before that. So. There's our special teams.
Yeah. with Campbell though, I mean, he's somebody who drilled a big kick against Purdue last year. He's the guy. He's going to be the kicker this coming season. Hopefully, hopefully, like you said, we're not cursing at the TV too much when Campbell comes onto the field. But just hearing the way the coaches talk about him, seeing the way he kicked, not only against Purdue last year, but he hit a long field goal in a non-conference game against Eastern Illinois last season, where he was kind of thrust into the field in the fourth quarter, and he just banged home a 40+ yard kick pretty effortlessly. So excited to see what Campbell brings to the table as IU's kicker next year.
All right, and that is it for our football freshmen and sophomores. And again, kind of like the freshman basketball, we're not going to talk too much, because same reasons we've talked a lot about them, and who really needs to talk about Trace Jackson Davis? We could give 2 or 3 episodes on just solely him. So we're going to do the same kind of thing. There's not as many sophomores, because of course it was a smaller class, but with a one Jerome Hunter taking a medical redshirt year, you've got Armand Franklin, Jerome Hunter, and then of course Trace Jackson Davis as our sophomore class. So besides Trace Jackson Davis, Nathan, who do you think is going to take at least, and not, I don't want to frame it as who needs to, because of course the easy answer would be Jerome Hunter, but who do you think is going to take the bigger step forward this next year, Armand or Jerome?
I think it's going to be Jerome Hunter, and it's not so much that Armand Franklin can't do it, but Hunter's somebody who it's just kind of the clear cut answer. With Justin Smith transferring, even Demezy Anderson moving on to Loyola, all signs are pointing to, hey, Jerome Hunter, let's go, baby. I mean, this is your time. Come in and try to knock down 35+% of your threes. Try to be an effective slasher to the rim when necessary. Try to get to the line and hit your free throws. Try to chip in on the glass. Try to make the smart pass when it's there. This is going to be a very interesting comparison and contrast to what Justin Smith did for IU in his 3 years in Bloomington. And more so than just the numbers, just style of play, execution, effectiveness, fit in the offense. For all these reasons, Jerome Hunter is somebody that I think every IU fan is going to keep an eye out for this year.
Oh yeah, of course. And I don't want to sleep on Armand Franklin at all because I think he's going to get better. He's a guy that doesn't want to be at the bottom of the roster. He's going to fight to improve, even with Christian Lander coming onto the roster this year, and he's going to try and get playing time and be a guy that's being more consistent. Because of course he had a couple of rough games, at least to say the least, when he was able to get onto the court. But more playing time, he's going to get better. But I think the guy that will take the step forward, especially as he's able to get on the court a lot, because we didn't see him get a lot of consistent court time, and for good reason. But I think Jerome Hunter, of course, is going to be that guy that is going to be take a little bit farther of a step forward than maybe Armand Franklin as a sophomore. And then, of course, Chase Jackson Davis. Don't need to go too much in depth with him. A guy that's fighting to get onto NBA scouts' radars, fighting to get into the second round, if not the first round, depending on what type of year he has. A lot of development that he wants to get, and a guy that wants to be at the program, because for the longest time he said, I want to be at IU. People forgot that a long time ago he said, I'm going to come back to IU before his official announcement about a couple months ago. So Trace Jackson Davis, guy that we really want to see. And then the only guy that potentially you might see his name called, Nathan Childress, a walk-on in for those non-conference games. But other than that, pretty obvious answer talking about Trace right there.
Yeah, I mean, this is Trace Jackson Davis is going to be the focal point of the basketball team next season. 13-8 last year as far as points per game and rebounds per game. How much do those numbers go up? I think that's going to that's going to make a pretty big difference on IU season. If those numbers regress, that's bad news. If those numbers stay the same, you might see a same type of performance from IU in this upcoming basketball season. But if they really ramp up and if he adds a trick or two up his sleeve offensively, watch out. That could really transform IU from a team that was a 20-win team this past season to something, a mid or even upper 20-win team next year if Jackson Davis does make a huge improvement.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think everyone wants to see, and I don't mean this to like say it down on Thomas Bryant, but I think everyone kind of wanted to see more, at least statistical production in his sophomore year, and hopefully Trace Jackson Davis exceeds all of that. And again, that's because Thomas Bryant's playing the NBA, the NFL. He's playing in the NBA. He was starting for a while before he's finding a good niche, and I get to see him locally too. But that's probably, and that is going to wrap it up for our 149th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to live audience, as always, for coming out, participating in that chat section. We really appreciate your support. Sorry again, Twitter has been really bad about responding to us, and I've been very upset with them because they said 7 to 10 business days. It's been 2 full weeks. That's 10 business days to where we've been trying to fix our Twitter account. So I'm sorry. Make sure you're following us on Indiana HQ. All of that is there as well, and we'll let you know when we're backing up and running on our own Hoosier Sound Twitter. But subscribe YouTube if you haven't subscribed there yet. Put the bell icon on, make sure that you can come join us for those live sessions. But most importantly, the way we really grow this podcast is by leaving us a review and then sharing this. So send it to a friend or a family. Say, hey, check these guys out in your free time, when all of us have a lot more free time going on right now. But that's really how we grow our podcast, so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.